Hi, and welcome back to this video series on the Common Rule, Habits of Purpose for an Age of Distraction. The Common Rule is a book about 8 daily and weekly habits designed to form us in the love of God and neighbor. This video series is a guide to reading the book, discussing the habits in community, and most importantly, practicing them together. Today, we're going to be talking about the last weekly habit, which is the habit of Sabbath. And what we're going to find is that in the rhythm of Sabbath, we encounter the rhythm of the gospel. We see in Sabbath that everything important in the world has already been finished by Jesus, so we can rest. There's some really good practical reasons to Sabbath. When I talk to groups of lawyers about taking a day off, I make legitimate arguments from productivity. Whatever you want to be, you're not going to get there by working 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. That's actually how you'll get to a nervous breakdown like I did. Studies show, interestingly, that work productivity sharply declines after about 55 hours of work a week, which suggests that we need rest to be productive for our clients or our customers or our colleagues and not waste time and money. Sabbath also, in an ironic way, helps with planning and deadlines, because when you have to take a day off, you've got to say, okay, I'm not working tomorrow. So what do I need to get done? Whether that's the laundry or a PowerPoint deck or some email to your team, whatever it is, you've got to tie it up so you can take the day off. And this forces deadlines. It's practically useful. Duke Ellington once said, I don't need more time. I just need a deadline. Because work, at least if you're like me, it's like a gas. It's always going to fill the space that you give it. And often containing it to 6 days a week doesn't mean you get less done. It just means you actually get something done. So I say all that. But all of that, that's nice. It barely scratches the surface of what Sabbath really does to us. What we're really doing when we Sabbath is we're confronted by a new identity. Here's how. In order to take a day off, in order to really stop your work for one day, you're going to have to reduce the idea of your importance. You're going to have to get comfortable with the idea that the world will make it for one day without you on email, or the world will make it for one day without you posting new content. You've got to get comfortable with the idea that your family is going to be fine if you postpone the errands. You've got to get comfortable with the idea that you actually really cannot finish it all. You can't. And this is so useful to realize. You know why? Because that's how reality is. You can't. We can't. We're small, limited, finite human beings who, when we pass away, people will forget our names. But the beauty of Sabbath is that when we rest, we are forced to turn our identity to a God who on the cross said, it is finished. And he's the one who tells us, actually, our names are written on his hands. And the most important person will remember our names. Which means that to lean into the practice of Sabbathing is actually to lean into the center of the Christian faith. That we are saved by something that someone else did. Something that we couldn't do. That's the message of grace. We can finally rest because God is the main actor and we aren't. Now, the practice of Sabbath is going to look really different across jobs and across life stages. So my biggest piece of advice is that Sabbath takes practice. You really have to work on it. You really have to work to find that rest. And I always find the phrase from the Rabbi Abraham Heschel useful. He said, a man who works with his mind should Sabbath with his hands, and a man who works with his hands should Sabbath with his mind. And I think it kind of reminds us that worship and rest are going to look different for different kinds of people. It's always going to include worship, and it's always going to include doing something different than we do through the week. But don't think nearly so much about what you shouldn't do. Think about what you should do. For me, that's the much more important question. For example, I spend some time Saturday making sure the week's work is finished up and making sure the house is clean enough to bear the not cleaning for 24 hours, which is, by the way, never always clean. It's just a little bit clean. And then we'll start our Sabbath and we'll go out and do something fun as a family. We might hang out with friends Saturday night, and maybe on Sunday morning we'll go to the later service, since that's a nice way to preserve the unhurried character of the morning. And by the way, sometimes the only way to get our 4 boys on time to the service. Then Sunday afternoon, we do an extended family lunch where the cousins can play and the adults can have real conversation. The thing that I would take away from that is not for you to do what I do necessarily, but just think about, there are so many ways to engage with worship and rest. And very importantly, Sabbath is communal. you're going to need other people to Sabbath with you. We need, as it turns out, people to help us create those rhythms and remind us that the most important work in the world was Jesus' work on the cross. And that is finished so we can rest. So that's the idea behind the weekly habit of Sabbath. As always, here's your fact to ponder, your question to discuss, and your habit to practice. Fact to ponder. It used to be that Americans demonstrated their status or their wealth by showing how much leisure time they had. Now it's flipped. We show off our status by showing how busy we are and how we don't have actually time for anything. So think about how Sabbath is a uniquely countercultural practice. For your question to discuss, I want you to talk about what would your ideal Sabbath look like? What would you do? How would you lean into worship? And how would you lean into rest? Now, your habit to practice this week is going to be to Sabbath. It doesn't have to be your ideal Sabbath, but just pick a day, get some friends, and try it together. See how you rest, see how you worship, and see what you learn. When you come back next week, you're going to have read the epilogue to the book on failure and beauty, and we're going to be talking about these two important concepts of spiritual formation, failure and beauty. As always, remember, your habits will not change God's love for you, but God's love for you can and should change your habits.